And welcome back. As we go ahead and continue looking at file I/O, one of the things that we need to address is this idea of nested constructors. And we have seen these up to this point, but now let's take a little bit more look at why. So nested constructors require invocations. Expressions that have two constructors, such as the following, are very common when you're dealing with Java's library of I/O classes. New buffered reader, parentheses, new file reader, original.txt. This is a manifestation of the general approach to how Java I/O libraries work. Each I/O class serves one or a small number of functions. So if we wanted to get full functionality, we normally need to combine two or even more class constructors. And that has to do with how these classes that are in the Java libraries are actually made, in that a lot of times, for example, as we've noticed with things like buffered reader and scanner, they don't pass in a file as a valid type. So we actually have to pass in an object to them. Now, with nested constructors, when we start peeling these apart and we look at, for example, that previous code, the object new file reader original.txt establishes a connection with that file original.txt, but it provides very primitive methods for input. The constructor for buffer reader, of course, takes this file reader object and then adds a richer collection of input methods, because if we try to use just file reader, we're going to be very restricted in what we can do. So what we do instead is that we use classes like buffered reader or scanner in order to have a lot more functionality. In these cases, the inner object, such as new file reader, original.txt, is transformed into an instance variable of that outer object, such as buffered reader. All right, and in Eclipse, let's go ahead and take a look at this done. We're just going to collapse our import statements so those are kind of out of the way. And in here, I have both a buffered reader and a scanner, just so we can have these kind of as an example. And you can see I also, of course, have in here a example with our output string here. So I'm going to go ahead and take this buffer reader. I'm going to write out this data.txt, and I'm going to put it into results. So data.txt, of course, is simply just a very simple numbers. I have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -1. And what I want to do is I'm going to take these, I'm going to parse them apart, and I'm going to add them together on each line. And then the scanner class is going to read those back in, and it's going to then just give me the sum of those numbers. So let's go ahead and run this. And we get the sum of the first three numbers is 6, so nothing unexpected there. And if we look at our result, we get the sum of each previous number. We got 1, 3, 6, 10, 15, and then 14. Because remember, the last digit here is -1. And again, when we look at our nested constructors, both with buffered reader and with scanner, we of course have that nested constructor. But another thing we'll note is that it also exists here when we do like our output streams. So for example, here we have a new print writer, new file output stream. So that is an important distinction here that we have to take note. Notice also the buffered reader is using a file reader class. The print writer uses file output stream, and scanner uses a file input stream. So these, of course, are very important distinctions here when we start looking at these and saying, what are we actually going to use with these? And one thing you'll also notice is that when we start using these variables, it's very important to, of course, keep in track of which ones you're using. For example, you'll notice I have an input stream.close here. All right, that input stream is corresponding to this buffered reader. But then you'll notice down here I have another input stream right here. And that's because this input stream that exists here is only localized to this try block. And so that's why this input stream, even though it exists here as the scanner object, doesn't actually matter, because this input stream, for all intents and purposes, when it gets to this point of the program, is localized to this try block. Now, one way that we could avoid this is I could, of course, just change this to a different variable name if I'm worried about these potentially overlapping. And then I wouldn't have to worry about anything like that. And again, this is not a problem right now because this input stream is inside this try block, but this one is not. So it allows us to kind of isolate things into local context, because that's something you gotta keep in mind if we start using, for example, multiple inputs or multiple outputs. These are things that you can do, but it's important to keep those in mind, and also keep in mind of how these different constructors are going to be used to create the actual objects that we're trying to pass in. Remember, things like buffered reader and scanner do not have the proper ability to pass in files, neither does print writer. So instead, we have to rely on these inner classes to act as that ability for us to read in where that file and data is going to be.